Superman is one of the most instantly recognisable characters in fiction, and I doubt there's many people out there who couldn't tell you the backstory or the origin of the Man of Steel. He's very much the original comic book superhero who fights for truth, justice, and the American way. But would you believe that wasn't always the case? And this poses a question. What is the American way, and why does Superman vow to fight for it so much? As you can probably tell, I'm not Scott. Instead, I'm Owen from Owen Likes Comics, and I'm filling in today to talk about one of the most interesting comic book characters, and in particular, his relationship with American culture and history. And as you can probably tell from the intro, today we're talking about Superman, and more specifically, what the character can teach us about what the American way actually is, and why it's so essential to the Superman character. Let's start with Clark's heritage. Rocketed away from a dying planet, Jonathan and Martha Kent find a small infant child in a crashed ship and raise it as their own on a small Kansas farm. Being a child of both Krypton and Earth, Superman embraces both his Kryptonian heritage and his human heritage and welds them together to create the Superman identity. Superman is very much a mix of the human Clark Kent and the Kryptonian Kal-El. This aspect of Superman's story references the American ideal of e pluribus unum, meaning one out of many. This is the idea that commonality as Americans can supersede any individual differences, and is actually the motto on the official seal of the United States. Now, you could probably argue that the Kents represent America themselves. Clark being sent from another culture to be raised in probably the most American place in America could also represent how a literal alien can be welcomed with open arms into the country. And although the story of America's foundation is nowhere near as fantastical as Superman's, the idea is still the same. Kal-El was sent to a new world with hopes of opportunities to thrive and succeed. But Superman doesn't just have one set of parents in the Kents. His Kryptonian parents also play a huge role in his life, besides the fact that, they're dead. Specifically, Superman's biological father, Jor-El, helped him to provide guidance to Clark along with his human father, Jonathan Kent. This is one of the fundamentals of the Superman character that has deep roots in Jewish mythology. Now, this is doubly symbolic when you take into consideration the time that Superman was first created. Superman, created in 1938, was published at a time where Jews, such as Superman's creators Jerry Siegel and Joel Shuster, were fleeing Nazi-controlled countries, and one place where many Jews found solace was America. Now, this all ties into the idea of Kal-El, which has very deep roots in Hebrew, also being changed to Clark Kent, a very Gentile-sounding name. The Superman mythos in itself has a very strong relationship with Judaism, which is something I'm going to talk about in a separate video sometime. But also, the importance of fathers in the Superman mythos also reminds me of the importance of the founding fathers in the fundamentals of the American way. The ideas and principles established by the founding fathers are still an important part of national identity in America today. They envisioned an enlightened society based around freedom and rational thought, and this isn't too dissimilar to Superman, who despite his immense power uses his extraordinary abilities for good and to better mankind. And Scott would probably kill me if I didn't mention that one of the founding fathers, Alexander Hamilton, was, just like Superman himself, an immigrant. We get it, Scott. You like Hamilton. Superman's immigrant status can't be lost on us. It is an imperative, fundamental part of who he is. In the simplest terms, Superman represents the American dream. And while the term wasn't coined by James Truslow Adams until 1931, the principles behind this ethos are the same as those set out during the Declaration of Independence, when the founding fathers envisioned a society where everyone was created equal. And while the American dream has symbolised different things throughout the history of America, it always comes back to this idea of freedom. The American dream is that anyone can come to the country and work and be an American, and be given equal opportunities to succeed through hard work and perseverance. Professor Benjamin Sanders of the University of Oregon writes, Superman changes with remarkable rapidity and yet manages to paradoxically project an idea of unchanging virtues. And this statement also stands true to the principles of the American dream. Political theorist Alexis de Tocqueville stated that the greatness of America lies not in being more enlightened, but rather in her ability to repair her faults. The American dream is at the heart of the broader American way, which centres around the ideas of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and, interestingly enough, is also referred to as the unalienable rights. This means that everyone, even Kryptonian super people, are entitled to these rights. And, as I said at the start, of course, we know Superman champions truth, justice, and the American way, but it wasn't always like this. Originally, the Man of Steel only fought for truth and justice, so when and why did it change? It was first changed to include the American way in a 1940s radio serial, although it was largely infrequent, before becoming commonplace in the Adventures of Superman series from 1951 to 1957, starring Superman legend George Reeve. It's also likely that this phrase was introduced at this period of time due to the beginning tensions of the Cold War, as relations between America and the USSR become tense, and therefore Superman was changed to champion the American way as a symbol of national pride. But before all of this came the Great Depression, of which Superman was very much born of. After the Wall Street crash of 1929, the failure of the American economy led to a variety of political and social conditions that would ultimately aid in creating Superman. The president during the Wall Street crash was Herbert Hoover, who stayed in office until 1933, when the American people voted a landslide victory for his opponent, Franklin D. Roosevelt. Now, Roosevelt offered a very unique style of politics, very different from Hoover's, promising to deliver what he called a New Deal. The New Deal was a series of economic policies introduced by Roosevelt in an attempt to solve the problems of the Great Depression, mainly the unemployment crisis, which in 1932 was the worst the country had ever suffered through, as well as the agricultural crisis due to the Dust Bowl, which had damaged mass farming regions in the Great Plains. But what's interesting to note is that so-called New Dealers saw themselves as champions of the common man, the champions of the oppressed. And Superman is no different to this. In fact, in Action Comics #1, Superman is actually referred to by the narrator as the champion of the oppressed. Now, the Superman of the 1930s and 40s is one far removed from a lot of the modern criticisms of the character. The Superman of the 1930s and 40s spent less time fighting supervillains and more time dealing with social inequality and social injustice. For example, in Action Comics #8, Superman destroys a city's dilapidated slums in order to force the government to rebuild better housing. All-Star Superman writer Grant Morrison discussed this in his book Super Gods, Our World in the Age of Superheroes, stating, "At the beginning, Superman was very much a socialist superhero. He fought for the unemployed, the oppressed, he beat up wife beaters. It's about a man driven by a burning sense of injustice. He was conceived as a Depression-era superhero who dealt with the problems of ordinary people." The popularity of Superman, which led to the creation of the superhero genre and creation of characters such as Batman, Wonder Woman, Captain America during this period of time, demonstrate how comic books and superheroes can provide an escapist form of entertainment from those suffering from the Great Depression. And what's interesting to note is that both Siegel and Schuster's families grew up with these same hardships of the Depression. It would be these hardships, along with their love of science fiction and the Jewish heritage, that would all go together to creating the Man of Steel, and as a result the superhero genre as a whole. And while Superman's popularity with the modern audience may not be the same as it was during the 1930s and 40s, with several critics of the character saying that he's too good or Superman's too unrelatable, some people believe that Superman isn't a man of tomorrow, he's more of a man of yesterday. But to me, and to many other people who appreciate Superman, Superman's greatest power lies in his humility. Superman's greatest superpower is that despite his immense power, he is incredibly humble and sees himself as nothing more than a normal man from Kansas. But let me know down in the comments, is Superman a representation of the American dream? And who is his secret identity? Is it the human Clark Kent, the Kryptonian Kal-El, or is Superman himself an amalgamation of both of these cultures? Let's talk about it all in the comment section below. And if you're looking for some more videos based around comic book culture, NerdSync has a whole playlist dedicated to just that. There you can find videos such as, was the creation of Superman inevitable? And do superheroes really need secret identities? And if you enjoyed this, make sure to subscribe to youtube.com/Owen Likes Comics, where we believe knowledge is our superpower. We make weekly video essays discussing the concepts and ideas behind our favourite characters and what it can teach us about both the comics that we love and also the world around us. And we also use lots of hand gestures. And if this is your first time hanging out with us here at NerdSync, I implore you to hit the subscribe button. NerdSync makes new videos every Monday, Wednesday and Friday discussing the history, science, art and philosophy behind your favourite comic book superheroes. Once again, I'm Owen from Owen Likes Comics, and until next time, take care and keep reading.